Hi guys, welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be discussing Laura Wall's biography of Henry David Thoreau. So Thoreau was an American philosopher, naturalist, what have you, of the mid-19th century. He's best known probably for his Walden, or A Life in the Woods. The reason why I read this biography right now is based upon a question I was asked. For those who have read my novel, Go Out From Us, you know that the main character encounters Thoreau's Walden, A Life in the Woods, and it positively impresses him, and he reflects on it, and he brings it with him on his journey, and it helps to guide him on in his difficulties. So recently someone asked me, what did Thoreau do after his year in the woods? And I didn't know the answer to that question. I had only started reading a biography of Thoreau, but I hadn't gotten very far into it. So I had to read that biography. The answer to the question is, immediately after Thoreau spent a year in the woods, he came out of the woods, and the first thing he did was basically he helped his also famous friends, the Emersons. Immediately, Ralph Waldo Emerson, his friend and mentor, was going to England to go on a speaking tour. So Thoreau, who was unmarried and had no children, he volunteered to help the Emerson family in the absence of the husband and father. So that was the first thing he did. He spent most of his life, he never did get married, but he spent most of his life in the public eye as an intellectual, as a speaker, as a writer, and sort of his main jobs, I guess. His family had a pencil factory, believe it or not. He also did a lot of professional work as a surveyor, and surveying obviously fit into his very deep interest in nature. He spent most of his time studying nature, living in nature. Well, I suppose in a way he's one of the first naturalists, really. And it's interesting how later on in life he didn't live super long. I think he died in his 40s, consumption, I believe, which was a real killer in those days. He was really influenced by Darwin's Voyage of the Beagle and Origin of the Species, which was just coming out. It's very interesting to see how, the state of biology, biological knowledge, and so on at the time. And one of the things that so fascinated Thoreau was he, was very much involved in one of the big industries in his area, of course, was logging and preparing land for farming. And he was very interested in seeing how land recovered after fires, how land recovered after clear cutting. And he just was fascinated by the fact that new trees would grow up even when they weren't planted. He didn't understand how these things happened. He looked at the seeds, and he studied their dispersal and so on. And he was really, really curious about stuff like that. And basically studied the world around him. He discovered a couple species of animals, birds. He was constantly studying the world around him and gained really quite a reputation as a naturalist. And even though he didn't have professional training as a scientist, Thoreau's achievements, Thoreau's legacy is a legacy on several different fronts, really. One of the things that most people associate with Thoreau, of course, is his position on civil disobedience, and basically how he influenced people like Tolstoy, Gandhi, and Martin Luther King Jr. in his passive resistance to violence and violent systems of violence. At the time, he went to jail at least once, and that was for his refusal to pay taxes. Now, it's interesting, at the time, there was no such thing. I don't think there was a sophisticated income tax or whatever, but there was basically a head tax, and he protested at the time in relation to the United States, basically its conquest of Texas. So Texas was a part of Mexico, and Thoreau, to protest against that, he said, I'm not paying tax, I'm not supporting that system. And that kind of position has obviously been very influential And later on, part of his legacy of nonviolence, well, let's just say, I don't know if he's called nonviolence or pacifism, but certainly the term that people focus on most, of course, is, it's called civil disobedience. It's not called pacifism. Someone like Tolstoy and Gandhi were pacifists. Thoreau wasn't a pacifist, but he eschewed violence. He actually, in one of his beginnings, he had some stints as a school teacher here and there. And in one place, he quit because he refused to issue corporal punishment. So one occasion, he had to, whip the kids or whatever. And he did. He finally agreed to do it. And then the next day, he quit. He said he's not going to do it that way. So it's kind of interesting in that regard. And how he wasn't one of these people who, at 20 knew everything and then consistently followed through. He was a man whose thinking evolved. He was, and quite respectful in that way, in the sense that he was a man who was constantly thinking and reevaluating. And one of the most moving passage in this biography of Walls, and it's an excellent book, really. I found it excellent. Other people might find it boring. I found it just very, very, very interesting, and I think the best or most moving passages was related to his family was super anti-slavery, and he was kind of not super active in that regard until things were really reaching, to a head in the years leading up to the American Civil War. For him, it was a learning thing for me, because I didn't know really very much about, I've started to read a bit of American history here and there, and one of the things was his support of John Brown. Now, I didn't know anything about John Brown, and as I said, I've read a couple books recently on the American Civil War, and I didn't know about John Brown. So John Brown, this was in Kansas. This John Brown, he was a super anti-slavery guy, and the thing was, when it came to the creation of the state of Kansas, the question was at that time, is this going to be a slavery state or a non-slavery state? So in the Union at the time, the southern states had slavery laws and the northern states had outlawed slavery. It was very important when these new states were becoming parts of the Union, like Texas, Kansas, the balance between slave states and non-slave states was very important in terms of voting in the Senate and all that stuff. So it was this John Brown who took matters into his own hands in a way, and he attacked Brown's attempt to initiate a slave revolt. And so he attacked the American arsenal at Harper's Ferry in Virginia. Now, it's interesting because that was the real beginning of the Civil War, when pro-slavery Southerners attacked the federal garrison, or I should say arsenal, in Fort Sumter, and that's set off the American Revolution, the American Civil War proper. So this was John Brown's attack on the garrison is often called the dress rehearsal for the Civil War. So what's interesting is, again, you can't call Thoreau a pacifist because he supported this John Brown, and he was extremely interested in it and gave speeches on his behalf and really tried to support him and rally people to support John Brown and to really move people against the slavery position in the South. So, but of course, Thoreau died before the American Civil War started itself, but I'm sure, despite the fact that it was an awful time of carnage, I'm sure that, Thoreau would have been happy that finally slavery is being taken on. So this John Brown was ultimately executed in 1859. But anyway, so it was a very moving thing, and how Thoreau was just got so geared up and interested in the whole emancipation movement. So the book it's not super fast moving or anything like that. It's, if you're interested in nature, if you're interested in his views of nature, of the meaning of life and so on, then this Biography is a really good, I found, a really good introduction to Thoreau and his ideas and his life. The more you learn about American history, and for a Canadian like me, it's a wonderful learning experience, and I'm sure a lot of Americans would know a lot more about it than I do. It's cool how you can, you start to make connections between different figures. Thoreau basically spent most of his life in Concord in Massachusetts. So for those who don't know, Concord is was just on the outside of Boston. I'm not sure if Boston's grown to such an extent that now Concord is part or not. I'm not sure. But in Concord, of course, lived the Emersons. And interestingly, the Emersons and Thoreau were also friends with the Alcotts. So of Louisa May Alcott of Little Women fame. They were friends with Nathaniel Hawthorne, of course, the Scarlet Letter fame and other books. And they also knew Longfellow. He doesn't seem to have been as integral part of the group or whatever, but Longfellow was certainly known to them, and they met him and all those people. So it's kind of interesting that you have all these big figures living in very close proximity and so on. So yeah, it's a cool book. It's a good book. And when it comes to Thoreau's a bit of a, why are we so interested in Thoreau? His book, Walden, or Life in the Woods, is really captivating. And I think in this day and age especially, we're really drawn to the idea of turn to nature, turn to simple life, and so on. But I mean, so that's part of the thing. And he was just a crazy naturalist at a time when people were in fact a lot closer to nature than we are today. He's alive at a time when American state is growing and spreading out into and really moving into the pristine American wilderness. Thoreau's was also extremely interested in the Indians and was fascinated by them and wanted to learn from them and form friendships and so on. So the plight of the Indians very much concerned him, as did the plight of black people, of slave classes. And he, if I didn't make it clear enough, Thoreau and his family, his sisters and mother, were really involved in the Underground Railway. So it's all kind of neat. So Thoreau speaks to a lot of people today. I think for some people, and especially for me, since I studied Tolstoy so much, the thing was, of course, his civil disobedience doctrine. And most times when you go to purchase a copy of Walden, they'll throw in his essay on civil disobedience as well. I know the volume I have includes both. So anyway, this is a pretty good book. Don't expect too much excitement. There's a little bit of excitement in it, but don't expect too much excitement. But it is getting to know the man. A unique man, a different man. Why he never got married. He loved children. He seemed to have a good relationship with women. And it's kind of interesting that in a way he's kind of like Tolstoy as well, is that Tolstoy saw a real connection between sexuality and violence. And so in a way did Thoreau. And I think that had a lot to do with the reason why he never got married. Anyway, so it's all cool and all good, and I recommend the book. It's excellent biography. Thanks, guys. I hope you have a great day, and we'll be back real soon with another review.